Mike's on Mike, a conversation about politics, government, and Jacksonville, with 50-year opinion leaders Mike Hightower, Mike Tolbert, and award-winning broadcaster and longtime political observer, Mike Miller.
Welcome once again to another episode of Mike's on Mike. Nice to have you here. I'm Mike Miller, and guess what? We're all here. Mike Hightower is here sitting next to me. Mike Tolbert is here sitting at the table, and we're delighted to have you here. We'll introduce our guest in just a moment, but first, a little bit of background. We're taping about a week before the long-awaited start of the federal trial regarding the JEA scandal. Former JEA CEO Aronson and Chief Financial Officer Ryan Wanamaker are scheduled to come before Judge Brian Davis on February the 20th. Our guest today is Nate Monroe, once again, Times Union outstanding columnist who's been documenting for years the attempt by Zahn and Wanamaker to allegedly snatch millions of dollars from the attempted sale of the Jacksonville utility. And by the way, in case you didn't know it, Nate's column appears every Thursday and Sunday in the Times Union. You can get it either in the paper or online. Nate, welcome back. Nice to have you with us. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
More than welcome. Listen, since this has been going on so long, why don't we start out by a little bit of background on this and tell us how the whole thing started and how you got involved in it.
Gosh.
That's right. We got 2 hours.
Yeah. That's a long
You were
one.
a cub reporter, right?
Yeah. Well, so I started at the paper 10 years ago, and my one of my first beats was to cover the city's independent authorities. What a luxury that was. We had enough staff to have someone who just covers the independent authorities. And JEA, I think it's fair to say JEA among those agencies is probably the one that looms the largest. It has the most direct impact on our lives because they determine how much we pay for electricity and water and to flush the toilet. And those are all very important things.
Quality of life.
Yeah. So I covered JEA for a number of years and I mean, the circumstances of how Aronson became CEO was something that, even apart from this privatization stuff, was controversial and something that we pretty closely scrutinized at the paper. And I was a part of that effort. And really from there, I mean, I think it would be safe to say that Zahn never really overcame that initial kind of controversy. This is someone who, look, the guy, everyone who has ever worked with Aronson will tell you that he is sharp. He is smart and he can present well. And he may well have other strengths in this world, but he did not have a day of experience at a utility of any size before he was chosen to be the CEO of JEA.
But he wasn't chosen because he had utility experience.
Right. I mean, the perception at the time, and I think that everything we've learned since sort of has vindicated this idea that he was a political ally of the last mayor. I think it was understood that Zahn was his preferred choice to lead the utility. And he was certainly somebody who I think came in with a very open mind about selling the utility. I would argue that was the consuming project of his entire tenure. And so, he was hired in 2018. So I would peg the start of all of this roughly around 2018.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Of course.
I have a different theory. I think it started when Curry really got elected, but then especially after he got reelected. And then he removed all the members of the board and put his buddies on there led by Petway. And then Petway 2 years later resigns. And as he's walking out the door, he does a mic drop.
Yes.
By suggesting we study the sale of the JEA.
That was his.
That's the first time it became public, but I think it was boiling beneath the surface a long time before. And of course, the Zahn thing was all part of it.
I mean, and I think there's a version of that theory that is even one that's not necessarily nefarious, which is that Lenny Curry is a Republican, and it's not crazy to think that a Republican might be interested in ideas to privatize city services. This is something that, Republicans sometimes are interested in. He certainly has people in his orbit or had people in his orbit who had connections to Florida Power and Light. I guess, I'll let people kind of draw their own conclusions about that. We have, years of reporting at this point about this whole controversy, and certainly Florida Power and Light and its parent company NextEra have been a part of that.
Right. Since when you I'm a little bit like Mike, I think, of when it started, but it was a weekend. You know, he was on the board on Friday, and on Monday he was elected chair. But it was there. But let's go for that. I think to get into the trial, this is what we're really into, is from your perspective, you've covered this even when I was on the board, before I left and when I retired and was on there, that the trial, it's finally starting. Why has it taken so long since he was fired by the board? 2019
Mm-hmm.
We're now in 2024.
Mm-hmm.
Why did it take so long?
I mean, part of the answer is that federal court just tends to take a little bit longer than state court. I mean, if this were a state court case, I mean, we would have been done with this one way or another like a year and a half ago, I think. Federal court, judges are very devoted to process, and in this case in particular, there has been a lot of kind of substantive pretrial debate about some complicated legal issues that we can get into if you want. But there's been a lot for the judge to sort through. I think judges are always also interested in creating a good record in case things get appealed down the road. You want to have a good record of things. You want to make sure as a judge you're being thorough. You give the defendants and their arguments their due, which is what they should do. And so I think, it's just been a combination of one, the process, and two, just some kind of pretrial controversy that's taken some time to sort out.
Where did Aaron Zahn come from? I mean, was this a relationship that he had with Curry when Curry was state chair of the party, even before he ran for office? Was he always waiting in the wings for a position from Curry once Curry got in there? We've already talked about his lack of direct utility experience that one would think would be needed to qualify for a position like this. He was just, as Mike Hightower said, he was just appointed to the board, and then next thing you know, he's putting in his application to become CEO, even against others that had run very large utilities across the country. So where did this friendship between Curry and Zahn come from?
I don't know that we've ever gotten a truly, really definitive accounting of that. Zahn, before his time at JEA, he was the head of a small-ish wastewater technology firm. Mm-hmm. Now, at least at the time that he was leading it, as far as we were able to tell, this firm had contracts in some smaller counties and cities around the state, and they offered a kind of proprietary service that allowed these municipalities to turn sewage into fertilizer. This is technology that JEA has actually had for a long time, and in fact, Zahn years ago sought work from JEA in his capacity as the head of this firm, which is like, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's what, that's what companies do. So he was not somebody, I mean, he did feel a little bit plucked out of obscurity at the time. He had dabbled a little bit in politics. He was a supporter of Curry's campaign in 2015, and he was appointed to be a transition or a member of one of the transition committees, which, that's the kind of thing that like can sound impressive when you see it in writing. I mean, I think transition committees sometimes are important and sometimes not, depending on the mayor. I don't know that his service on that was something that elevated him to being someone of a stature to like go work at JEA. So he did feel a little bit kind of like it came out of nowhere. He had gotten to know Curry a little bit socially. Zahn had actually testified at one point long before this criminal case that he had started going to the same church as the Currys. And so I assume that that's where the kind of interpersonal relationship started.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mike, my time?
Yeah.
One of the things that led up to all this, Nate, was it didn't take long for Zahn to start sounding the alarm that the JEA was financially in a free fall, and they were going to have to start laying off employees, and they were going to have to start raising rates as a smoke sign for what they were going to try to do. My memory is under Paul McElroy, the JEA was running pretty damn well.
Yes.
And why do you think it was so easy initially, not eventually, but initially for him to sell that nonsense?
Well, I mean, I would say first, I don't know that he ever did successfully sell that nonsense to the broader audience,
Yeah,
right? I mean, I think lots of people were always skeptical about this narrative, in part because it was so abrupt. I mean, I covered JEA from like 2013 on. And so by the time Zahn comes on the scene in 2018, and I know, Mike, in your capacity as a board member and then as an employee of JEA, you can relate. I mean, I had sat through so many of these like turgid presentations about how great everything was, hearing phrases like good news from a credit perspective. I mean, I just had heard all this stuff for years and years. And then all of a sudden Zahn shows up and it just seemed, the future is uncertain. And I mean, so the rhetoric had changed almost immediately. And as a reporter, that was something that struck my colleagues and I still have the good fortune of working with people who have been at the paper a long time and similarly felt like this was all coming out of nowhere. Now, how did Zahn sell this to the board of directors that he had at the time? I mean, I think there are a couple of possible reasons. One is, this was a board of appointees of Lenny Curry. I think we all understand now that Lenny Curry was supportive of selling JEA, whether he was supportive of the specific effort Zahn made, whatever. I'll let him, he's talked about that a lot. So I think on one level, the board just kind of understood this is what the administration wanted. I will say in the board's quasi defense, these are volunteers that serve on these boards. The utility industry is very complicated. And while I think it's fair to ding them for a profound lack of curiosity about the things they were being told, they do rely on the management at these agencies to tell them the truth. Exactly. Yes. And in these presentations that Zahn was giving, and for people who are not fully sort of caught up on this, I mean, the short version is, Zahn sort of spun this narrative that JEA was facing a very bleak financial future and presented the board basically with a kind of Hobson's choice. You either let us decimate our workforce and lay people off immediately, 30% of our workforce, that's hundreds of people, or we have this kind of mysterious third option that basically was just letting JEA get acquired by a larger private utility. In these presentations, I mean, this like bleak financial future was presented as an absolute certainty. There was no countervailing voice as part of these presentations. There was no sort of disclosure that these were taking all the worst case scenarios, looking at a range of possibilities and taking the worst one down the line each time. There was nobody offering a different sort of outlook for these board members. And so, they should have been more curious. I think they should have had more skepticism about the things they were being told. But at the end of the day, I mean, these are just people like us. And in some cases, people who know less about utilities than the four of us sitting at the table here. These are just volunteers and they need management to tell them the truth. And that is kind of the core of this prosecution in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and to underscore that, to what Nate was saying, I mean, and it'll come out in the trial, you had Zahn, and we talked about how he got there. But, and again, I'm giving it from somebody who was on the board chair and then went inside and watched this. But where Nate is right, what you had is Zahn coming in here, then you had Melissa Dykes, and you had the CFO right there on either side of him. So when they were asking the questions, they were saying, we're using a death spiral. So you had these folks who were financial people who had been brought in by Paul McElroy, and they were giving these statistics that all of a sudden the world was coming to an end. Nate's doing this, and to his credit, when you get the monthly board meetings, it's this much. Yeah. It finally went on board. It was a con game.
Does the council auditor's office play any kind of role in that? Could they have done anything to investigate?
Not until Nate was a dog with a bone. That's how we finally got there.
Yeah, let's go back. I want to change it just a little bit again, if y'all don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Zahn and Wanamaker are not on trial for trying to sell the JEA. They're on trial for trying to steal millions of dollars, 40 million.
For the pup. Yeah.
No, 40 for him.
40 for him out of the bonus plan. So tell us a little bit about the bonus plan. And on February 1st, you wrote that Zahn had told one of the JEA consultants back then that had the mayor's blessing for him to do that and collect that money.
Yeah. So, and I'm glad you teed this up, because we are sort of backing into like what the trial's about. This podcast is definitely not for the uninitiated, but so you're right that they're not on trial for this attempt to sell the agency, although that is part of the prosecution's narrative. And it's part of the prosecution's narrative because the core allegation is that these two executives conspired in secret to create a kind of a get rich quick scheme. And that scheme depended upon JEA being sold. They were essentially going to skim profits off the top of a sale that otherwise would have gone to the city as its sale proceeds. We don't know how much money they were planning to get or thinking they would get, in part because the transaction never happened. This bonus plan hit some roadblocks before it got to a point, I think, that was ready to sort of actually implement. But yeah, the core allegation is they are accused of trying to skim profits. Some of the testimony that we've seen in court so far, not as part of the trial, but as part of these kind of pre-trial controversies I referenced, we know that the government has evidence that Zahn told at least one person around him that he had an expectation that he was going to make a lot of money if he had successfully, what in his words, recapitalized JEA. And so, yeah, that's the core allegation. They tried to get rich off a sale, and that also makes privatization and this kind of bonus conspiracy, are linked. They are linked together, and so the alleged criminal fraud is a fairly narrow accusation, but it's tied to what the government presents as kind of a broader fraud, which is this contrived case that Zahn built to sell the agency. And that's where we get into he picked extreme negative scenarios every time. They're going to argue about this in the trial.
If there were no pup, if the bonus plan had never been part of the scheme, and it had just been the issue of the sale of JEA, would that have had a smoother road, do you think? Then, in other words, did that skimming become the issue rather than the sale of the utility?
Yes, I think that the privatization effort was controversial in its own right. It was moving very fast.
Right.
Again, it was based on what to a lot of people looked like a pretty fraudulent narrative about JEA's future. A lot of it was happening in secrecy. The way that this was actually being done was very odd, but none of that, but that had been, all of that had been true for months before we learned about the true nature of this bonus plan. And nobody on the city council, there were critics on the city council of the sale effort, but there was no kind of overwhelming bipartisan push to oust management and to put a stop to all of this until the bonus scheme, until the council auditor's office kind of did the math and figured out the lucrative nature of this little plan that got kind of slipped in past everyone. So I do think that was the thing that killed it, and I do think, absent that, it probably would have gone through.
Well, going back, this thing was on a fast track. And we remember, Mike and I remember especially, there were a lot of people in town in leadership positions talking amongst themselves about how can we stop this? They were looking at a January meeting to put this on a spring ballot, a referendum to approve the sale.
Right.
And they were building up all this money, and I think Florida Power and Light was planning to give them a lot of money to make the case.
Next era.
And I know that the first meeting that Mike and I went to was in November prior to that January council meeting of what became our JACs.
Yeah. That's because it was like we were seeing a tidal wave came, and The
And at that
unions
point,
were against it.
our first meeting was a really, let's organize and see if we can raise money
Exactly.
to fight it at referendum. So that was before the PUP plan got exposed.
Yeah.
And that interrupted everything and changed the game a whole hell of a lot.
It changed the momentum entirely. I mean, I remember, to your point, I actually had written a column it was almost more of an open letter to the city's like civic leadership saying, look, I know you all think that this is weird, and it's like, I know none of you really like this, but unless you stand up and say something, it's going to happen. And I think that was a reflection of my, as a columnist, frustration at the time that there wasn't more pushback among the city's leadership against what was going on. I mean, it was clear that these, JEA, I mean, they were starting to make claims that, we're going to see sales decline over the next 10 years. That sounded very dramatic. They were making comments about, we've already reduced our workforce by X amount. And that had never sounded right to me. I didn't remember at the time Paul McElroy ever cutting JEA staff. They were talking about how much rates had already gone up over the preceding years, and that didn't really sound right to me either. And some of that stuff was the JEA management kind of manipulating, data. And so, yes, the momentum, I think, was very much in kind of pushing in the direction of a quick sale, and the bonus plan changed that entirely.
I remember Jake one time saying to me, where is everybody? I'm out here on this damn limb by myself.
Right.
And where's everybody else? And everybody else caught up.
To your point, to Mike's point, Nate, when we got together, it was a group of us, but it was basically David Miller, Michael Ward, Audrey
and Sherry.
And we were following your column, and it was getting the information out there using your column and using your information, because it was like there were a couple of members of the city council, but they were the lone wolf. And I can remember our conversation. By then I was gone from JEA, but Zahn at staff meeting would say, particularly when I would say the council's not for it, and he told me umpteen times, the mayor says we got 10 votes, not to worry about it.
Wow.
And then that's when he shared with us that he had been city council with his badge 200 times. And thanks to you, I mean, if it hadn't been for your column, I'm not sure we could have gotten our jacks off.
Might not have.
Yeah. One thing we haven't done that we need to go back and clarify. Both Zahn and Wanamaker are charged with 2 counts. Is that correct? Conspiracy and wire fraud?
They're charged with 1 count each of conspiracy and wire fraud. Conspiracy being what it sounds like it is, and wire fraud is related. This is a little bit less straightforward, but it's these JEA meetings are recorded and live streamed on the internet. And that's where the kind of wire fraud comes from. The idea that someone in a different state can see a fraudulent presentation. That's sort of the nature of what that wire fraud count is.
Why are they doing 2 separate juries? Is that what Wanamaker wanted? Is that what Zahn wanted, or the prosecution?
The defense, wanted, at least Wanamaker's defense attorneys, and I'm fairly certain Zahn's did too, wanted to sever their trials. They wanted 2 separate trials. This gets into some of the pretrial controversy. So Zahn and Wanamaker, before they were fired by either the board or by JEA management, they sat for interviews with the city's Office of General Counsel. OGC was basically doing kind of a workplace investigation into Zahn's tenure. And I guess the short version of this is, sometimes when there's controversy, there are multiple kinds of investigations that can happen. There are kind of more civil workplace-based investigations, and then there are criminal investigations. When it's a public employee who is being investigated, sometimes crossing those 2 kinds of investigations can be problematic. So prosecutors could not use anything that either man said in the course of their interview with city attorneys.
Oh, okay.
I forgot the name of the rule, but I know what you're saying.
Yeah, it's called Garrity rights.
Garrity.
Public
Yeah, there it
employees. Yeah. So I'm trying to avoid like legal jargon because this stuff just is not, in addition to not being very interesting, it can get a little bit confusing. But yeah, so their interviews with
Not
the
to
city.
mention the ignorance of the three of us. I have no idea what you'd be talking about.
So the interviews that they did with the Office of General Counsel, there are transcripts and they're publicly available interviews. The prosecution could not use those to build their indictment in any way. And so a lot of the pretrial controversy is kind of revolved around the defense saying, well, we think the prosecution did use some information from those interviews, or if they didn't even mean to use those, maybe because they're publicly available knowledge about the contents of tainted aspects of the investigation. And at this point, the judge has basically said no. The indictment is not based on those interviews, and most of the witness testimony has been cleared of any potential taint by these interviews. So because of reasons related to that controversy, the defense had thought it had a strong argument to sever the trials entirely. The judge, I don't think any judge wants to do the same trial twice, particularly a lengthy substantive one like this is going to be. And so the judge's suggestion was the judge's order was we're just going to have two juries sitting in one trial, which apparently has happened before. It's not a normal thing, but it's not unprecedented in that courthouse.
I think Judge Davis is about to retire soon anyhow.
He took senior status in December.
Yeah,
so he is quasi-retired.
I think he doesn't want this to go much longer. I think he's probably tired of it as everybody else.
I wonder if there's any discussion at all about trying to plead this thing out and not do the trial at all on the 20th.
Nate, I'd ask you, I mean, we've come this far. Can you see, is it so far down? You've covered this thing, and I'm not blowing smoke here, but from knowing the business and tracking this, is this so far down the track that there's no way they can plead it out?
I mean, I can't answer that definitively. I guess a plea deal is always possible up until the moment the trial starts, maybe even after the trial starts. I'm not entirely certain. Part of it would depend on how willing the government is to hear that. Part of something that I think people don't take into account when they talk about it, because I've heard from the beginning, oh gosh, Zahn is going to flip on the mayor and start singing about all this terrible stuff that we've never heard before. And I mean, the first part to that is we don't know what there could be, right? Like this is just assuming the mayor committed crimes, and that's problematic. But also keep in mind, the government is prosecuting Aaron Zahn and Ryan Wanamaker basically for being serial liars. Okay. And so if you've made a public accusation against these two guys that they're serial liars, well, turning around and presenting them as key witnesses in a prosecution would be a little bit problematic because the jury is going to know that the government thinks that these guys are liars. So how useful could they possibly be? And again, I've heard this about Ryan. Well, he'll flip on Zahn and cooperate. Well, maybe the government doesn't view Ryan Wanamaker as a particularly useful witness because they think he's a liar. Yeah. And that's what you have to kind of keep in mind here, that I don't know that the government really cares about them pleading out or not. I mean, that's just assuming that there's this appetite one way or another. Now, again, I'm just giving you sort of my analysis of it, but that could very well also be why we haven't seen anyone plead out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go to the lightning round.
All right. Let's go to the lightning round.
Yeah, this is going to be interesting.
Yeah. This is what we do in a lightning round is we're going to give you a name or an event, and then you just give us a response. Okay. It doesn't have to be the very first one. You can actually think about your response before you
or in our case, we don't think, and we just, in our case, we don't think.
It's called a lightning round for a reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Short answers.
Short answers.
All right. Go ahead, Mike.
Anna Brochet.
Council president, one of the first public skeptics of privatization, I think, and a little bit ahead of the curve.
Kyle Billy.
If the story has any real hero. I think Kyle Billy and the office he leads, they probably all qualify. Council auditor, decoded this really opaque bonus scheme, so yeah, those are good public servants.
Steve Busey
led a very useful investigation into the privatization effort on the city council's behalf, created a really comprehensive record that I think is, like I said, useful, good for us to have.
Melissa Dykes.
Some people think she'll be the government's kind of star witness at the trial. She was either the number 2 or number 3 at JEA under Zahn's tenure. A lot of people I've heard wonder why she wasn't charged.
I was going to say, she seems to always be the matron of honor, but never the bride.
I'm not sure what you'd want to be the bride of. You're on this one, bride of Frankenstein. Go ahead. It's your lightning round. Sorry.
Yeah. I think she is someone that lent her credibility to Zahn's privatization campaign. And I think, I think that damaged her reputation in the eyes of a lot of people who thought, she could have been, I think she was Paul McElroy's kind of preferred successor and
could have been, should have been.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Probably the biggest disappointment for those of us who knew her.
Florida Power and Light.
A very large, powerful utility company in the state of Florida.
Wow.
By the way, wouldn't it have been interesting if Reedy Creek Utility Company, which is the utility company of Disney World before they got rid of Reedy Creek, was the Oversight Commission, if they would have gotten that? Anyhow, okay. Tim Baker.
Political consultant, at least at one time, a Florida Power and Light consultant, and a figure of some intrigue in all of this controversy.
All right. Final question, sir. On our list here. What should people be looking for in the trial, and which witness, from your perspective, should we be interested in paying most attention to?
Well, I mean, as I said when in the lightning round, I think there's been an assumption that Melissa Dykes would be sort of the government star witness. I think it's actually the council auditors. I think it's the Kyle Billy and Jeff Rada as an auditor over there, and Kim Taylor. I think they're going to actually offer the jury the most compelling testimony. I've seen the 3 of them already testify over the summer. I've seen the bulk of what they plan to say, and they strike me as some of the most credible, kind of problematic witnesses for the defense, because they're very smart. They figured this stuff out. And they're just, it's difficult for me to see how you impeach their testimony. I mean, they're just, straight public servants. And so I think I expect them to be the most sort of substantively compelling for the prosecution. It's hard for me to say. We've heard from most of the witnesses. There will be a Florida Power and Light vice president who testifies during the trial. He is a person who helped actually put NextEra's bid together, helped them kind of figure out the $11 billion figure that NextEra offered. And I've not heard his testimony yet. And that's one that could be interesting. But I don't know. That's certainly what of the witnesses I have not heard from. He is the one that I'm probably the most interested in.
Great. Thanks.
If okay, guys, I'm going to use Mr. Tolbert's line. If I can change the subject.
Yeah, but quit rattling those damn things.
I'm sorry about that. I have so many notes for this show today.
Our curmudgeon over here can't hear.
I'm sorry about that. All right.
There's just one curmudgeon at this table. I think it's probably 4.
Well, we're working on Mr. Miller.
These ethics bills, because there's a Senate as well as a House companion that's currently being debated in Tallahassee. The Senate bill mandates that complainants' ethics issues possesses personal knowledge of the alleged ethics violation and effectively strips local ethics commissions of their ability to initiate independent investigations. So much for whistleblowers, I guess, huh? where did this come from, and why does it seem to be gaining such great strength on both sides of the political aisle up there, by the way? This is not a partisan issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, Tallahassee's not my normal sort of beat. So in some ways I have a little bit of, I am limited insight into this, but so the Senate was putting together a kind of broad ethics bill that was looking at some changes to the state ethics commission. And I think some of it was good. Some of it was maybe not so good, but on balance wasn't a bill that anyone was particularly freaking out about. But then it comes up to the Senate floor for a vote, and a state senator, Danny Burgess, proposed a series of amendments, at the last minute, that got debated just right there on the floor of the Senate. That really, I think, take the bill and give it a much more kind of far-reaching impact. One of the changes would require, as you referenced, it would mandate that ethics commissions across the state, including the state ethics commission, but also local ethics commissions like the one we have here in Jacksonville, that they could only initiate an investigation if they receive a complaint, a signed complaint and sworn complaint, of someone possessing personal knowledge of a potential ethics violation. That sounds like pretty anodyne language, but that could, depending on how narrowly you want to interpret that could almost eliminate the possibility of anybody reporting ethics violations, for the simple fact that the number of people that possess what you might call personal knowledge of a potential violation sometimes might just be the person committing the violation.
Exactly.
So, that is probably the most problematic part. There's another portion of it that would require local ethics commissions to operate the way the state ethics commission does. And, I think the only complaint I ever tend to hear about the state ethics commission is that it doesn't do enough. And so, that would be imported into our local ethics regime as well.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I think we better get out of here. Nate, first of all, thank you so much for your great work, for being here.
Yeah.
Your great work. I
can hear the applause in the audience.
Yeah, really.
I hate to think what the last 3 or 4 years would have been like without your reporting and your vigilance there. Tell us why, things are going on in that industry. We talked about it before we went on the air.
Yeah.
In your industry, in the newspaper business. Tell us why local newspapers are so damn important.
Why are they so important? There's been a lot of research on local news and the decline of local news in communities around the country. And sometimes they find some pretty surprising similarities in communities that have lost newspapers. There have been studies that show that in communities where the newspaper has disappeared, you find increased partisanship. The theory being that people are replacing local news with national news in their diet, and consuming national news tends to feed on people's sort of partisan feelings. Local news is not the same way, right? The JEA stuff, you can maybe try to fit into some ideological box, but really this was a scandal born out of kind of civic concern that people had, and it crossed the aisle. I mean, this is a very bipartisan sort of backlash. So you find increased partisan attitudes. There is a study that shows that in communities that don't have newspapers, government spending actually goes up. The theory being there's no one around scrutinizing how the government's spending money. There is a study that shows that fewer people tend to run for office. Civic engagement goes down. So, I mean, those are in some ways intuitive reasons why local news matters. I mean, this local news and our local government institutions this is a cliche, but I mean, that is the government closest to the people. And that's, if you're mad about a sidewalk in front of your house or a pothole or a median with grass not being mowed, I mean, this is local government is where that stuff gets done. It touches our lives in much more kind of tactile, tangible ways than I think people often realize or think about.
To follow up on that, can you kind of give our listeners just the impact of the change at the Times Union from the time you've been here and where we are now to underscore what you're saying.
Yeah. And, we were talking about this off air. When I started here 10 years ago, there were like 100 people in the newsroom. And there were many dozens of more in other parts of the building in our old campus. The Times Union's gone through several ownership changes since I've been here. But when I started, this paper existed as it had, in the decades prior. It was an industrial operation. We had a printing press. We made stuff, not just a newspaper. I mean, the company had printing clients. It printed stuff for people, and we had advertising and marketing, and it was just a fundamentally different business than it is today. I mean, today we still print a paper. We don't print it locally. But we are a website, and, we have about a quarter of that 100 people that we had in the newsroom back then. And most of that support staff and other parts of the company are gone. And or they're not local. And so the sort of decimation of local news, like the Times Union, has not escaped that by any means.
Want to take a look at the crystal ball and tell us what you think the paper's going to look like in 5 years?
I mean, it's a hard thing to predict this stuff. I do get the sense that for the foreseeable future, I do think that we feel pretty stable. I actually think that the daily print product will be around longer than people think. It still makes money. And so, my hope is that at least where we are now is more or less where we'll be in 5 years. But this industry is in a fraught moment. It's been in a fraught moment since I graduated from college. So, I don't think that'll change.
Okay.
Mr. Talbot, you got the last word.
Goodbye.
Okay.
Nate, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
We do appreciate it.
We appreciate it.
And thank you all for watching or listening, however you're catching our program. And we thank you very much for being with us. Our thanks, as always, to the Jacksonville History Center and the Historical Society for their support of our podcast. And I'm going to go ahead and promote this next week because I'm excited about it. Your colleague, one of the few you still have, David Bauerlein, is going to be here. David wrote a story shortly after the new year saying that there are 8 important stories of 2024 that you got to keep your eye on. Well, that's what we're going to do next week. We're going to have David here with us, and he's going to be telling us about those 8 issues and where he feels we are on those issues and some background on all of them.
Which kind of keeps the Times Union front and center, which we think it should be.
Which we're happy to do always.
We appreciate it.
Right. Catch our program on Facebook, on our website, mikesonmike.com. You can find us on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and just about any other platform where you get your podcast. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.
Take care.
Mike's on Mike with Mike Tolbert, Mike Hightower, and Mike Miller can be found on your favorite podcasting platform, Facebook, and YouTube. Visit the website at mikesonmike.com. Join us next time for more conversation with Mike's on Mike.